Hi, Peter Charles here, Focus for Life Fly Fishing. And today let's look at building indicator leaders for nymphing for trout fishing. This suggestion was given to me by Travis Mueller. I opened to suggestions, so if you have an idea for a video, drop it in the comments and I'll take a look at doing it. Or maybe I already have a video on it and I'll just let you know which one it is. Either way, so anyway, let's get started about building a nymphing leader. Now, this particular leader is not about Euro nymphing. I do a lot of Euro nymphing. I have leaders for that. Rather, this is for use with indicators. This is the airlock system. If you're going to use an indicator, I really do suggest you use these. They're very effective and, more importantly, very easy to adjust, very easy to put on, very easy to take off. And that's a big deal with me. I don't use these very much anymore because I'm mostly doing Euro nymphing, but once in a while you pull out the indicator and away you go. So let's talk about building the leader for our indicators. So to start off, we need a butt section. So I've got a couple of choices for where to get the butt section from. One thing is if we have some tapered leaders like this and we've ruined the end of it, we don't want to use it anymore. Well, there's your perfect butt section, and you've already got a loop on one end, so I mean you're off to the races right there. But you can also use stuff like this, which is 30 pound. I've got 30 pound cheap mono. The only problem was it's a little coily, so you have to do a little bit of straightening before you can really use it. But other than that, it works fine. The 30 pound mono works fine. Now this butt section that I'm making, the important thing about that is that it's the section that holds our indicator. And it provides turnover energy, obviously. It provides some separation between the indicator and the end of the fly line, because we don't want the fly line going over the fish. So it's going to be around 3 to 4 feet long, and that's it. You don't want to make it too long, because then the turnover can get awkward. And if you make it too short, then your fly line is going over the fish. So 3 to 4 feet is good. And there's a concept to the way I put these leaders together. I use these indicators as a fine adjustment, not as my only adjustment tool. So I make the final adjustment by moving the indicator a few inches this way, a few inches that way, depending on whether if I'm hitting bottom a lot, I'll shorten it up. If I'm not hitting bottom at all, I'll lengthen it. But the point of the matter is I'm doing something else to get my primary adjustment. So let's talk about that and how I put these leaders together. It doesn't matter what type of leader I'm doing. When I'm building it, I always start with my perfection loop. And I'm not going to actually show you the knots. I mean, there's tons of videos on YouTube on how to do knots. So that's just redundancy. So I'm just going to do my perfection loop. And one of the things I like to do is I'll use like my forceps or something like that to actually apply some pressure so I can get a really tight knot. There we go. There's my perfection loop. Now here's the sneaky bit. The other end, we would normally tie that to some mono, because this is mono. Keep in mind, mono barely sinks, and it'll float in the surface tension of the water. So instead, what I'm going to do is I better put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. Instead, I'm going to use tippet rings, and this is steelhead tippet rings, and the reason why I'm using steelhead tippet rings is this mono's thick. If I was to use trout size, I'd have trouble putting it through the ring, and then I won't be able to knot anything else to it. So what we do is we take the ring closest to the end of the snap, because these things are sold on snaps. Don't take the tippet ring off the snap. So we're going to feed it through. Once it's through, you can tie whatever your favorite knot is. Uni knot, clinch knot. I'll use a uni knot here. If you're doing a uni knot with thick mono, I do a lot with saltwater mono. I only do 3 turns. I find with more turns on thick mono, you don't get a really good seating of the knot, and they slip out. You can't get it snug down, and then I just grab a pair of my forceps or something, again, put real good tension on that. get that knot to seat. Make sure it looks good. Trim the tag off. Now we can remove that ring from the snap, because these things are sold on snaps. So we'll just remove that. Okay, now we're done with that. So what I've got a perfection loop on one end, and I've got my tippet ring on the other. Now this is my permanent leader for my nymphing. Whatever goes on past here, off that tippet ring, is temporary. And that's the material I use to adjust my distance. So I'm putting this on now for sake of argument. Actually, I won't put this on until that was actually looped onto the fly line. But I'm just going to put this on for the moment so you can see how easy it goes on. You've got a little cap with a little rubber washer. You've got a groove. You just lay it in the groove, put the washer in. Now tighten the little cap on. Now when you want to adjust it, you just have to loosen it off and slide it. So loosen it off, slide it, tighten it. So that's basically what it would look like. You'd have my tippet ring here, and my indicator would be relatively close to the tippet ring. You don't want your indicator way back here, okay? So how we make the adjustment for the rest of the game, the rule of thumb is, you know, if it's 3 foot of water, you want a 4.5 foot depth. I find that's often too much, but I'll leave that up to your judgment. I would often go with, you know, if it's a 3 foot depth, I'll go with just a little over 3 feet, because what I'm aiming to get is a direct, almost a vertical hang down. And as it goes through the water, I'm not looking at going through sideways. I want to going through almost vertical. So that's the reason why I tend to be closer to 1 time the depth versus 1.5 times the depth. That will depend on how you tend to fish indicators. So I'll just leave that out there. But I would set this up for 1 time. So let's say I've got an estimated 3 foot depth. I will build the rest of this, and the rest of this is temporary. I'll use some 4X tippet, and I will give me about 2 feet of 4X. And I'll put this on the tippet ring. Again, a uni knot. And this is fluorocarbon, I should say. I forgot to say that. I'm using fluorocarbon because it sinks. I'm not using mono for this part of the leader. Trim your tag off. So now I've got my 30-pound mono, my tippet ring, and I can go straight to 4X fluorocarbon. Now, you could never knot that together and have it hold. It would break if you tried to knot it directly. You'd have a lot of trouble, but I can easily put my 4X fluorocarbon onto my 30-pound mono by using that tippet ring. The end bit is going to be made out of, you could use 5X, 6X. I tend to go light, so I'd use roughly 1 foot of 6X. So I'll use the triple surgeon's knot to put that together. Key to getting good knots, wet. Pull it till it flips over. Yank it. Now you've got a lovely knot there. It's turned over beautifully. I trim my tags off. Now my fly is going to go on the end of that. That's my tippet. There's my knot. So that gives me about 10 inches there. Maybe 8 after I've done my knot. Now, a couple of choices. These are my Euro nymphing flies. They're tied on jig hooks with tungsten heads. If I use one of those flies on the end of here, I don't need any split shot. That fly alone was going to take this fluorocarbon down with no trouble, because the fluorocarbon doesn't resist sink very much. It wants to go down on its own. So you could do that. Or if you're going to use a lighter fly, then I've got this tin shot here, and I will put that above that knot. That's the reason why we have 2 sections. To provide us with a knot, so any split shot I put above this, it will not slide down to the fly. It will stay trapped by that knot. Also, if I was to snag up, it will break here at the knot. So I still have all of this left. I still have my split shot left. I can slide it up, tie on a new piece of tippet, slide my split shot down, and away I go. So if I break off and it doesn't break off at the fly, it will break off at that knot, and I'll still have my split shot and the rest of my leader. So I always build my leaders with the idea as well in my mind, there's a deliberate fail point, that if I have to break it off or if a fish breaks me off, I lose the minimum amount of leader. So there's my leader. Let's go through the whole thing again. I've got 3 to 4 foot of 30 pound, or you can use the butt section of a tapered leader. I've got a perfection loop at the end. I've got my little indicator, my airlock. I've got a steelhead tippet ring, which I've knotted my 30 pound to, and I've tied some 4x fluorocarbon, and that's about 18 inches to 2 feet. And then I have my 6x tippet, and my fly goes to there. And this part here, from the tippet knot to the end, that's disposable. That is where I get my primary adjustment. I'm going to estimate my depth, and I'm going to build this part of the leader accordingly to the depth of the run. So I'll build it on site. And this part of the leader never changes, and I try to keep my indicator, 6 inches, a foot away from the tippet ring. So there's my adjustment distance basically for the indicator, is that foot right there between the tippet ring and where my finger is here. That's where I would expect my adjustments to be. If I'm putting my indicator way down here close to the perfection loop, then this part is way too short and I have to lengthen it. And I can always add another piece of tippet if I wanted to. So keep that in mind, that this part is your primary adjustment, the length of the leader beyond the tippet ring, and your airlock indicator is just the fine adjustment for moving up and down a little bit as you navigate the run. Now, when you're done and you want to store this, I have an old spool, for a tippet spool. It's empty. The green that you see here is actually one of those elastics that girls use to tie up their ponytails. And I'm using that. And what I do is I'll take that out. I'll wind my leader onto this, put that little elastic on. Now I can take the spool and put it in a pocket. And I can even leave the indicator attached if I wanted to. And, I'm ready to go. I could just unspool this, slip it on my fly line, and away I go. So it's a very, very easy way to carry your completed leaders around without worrying about getting them all tangled in a pocket. But just remember that the whole thing about this is I've got a perfection loop at one end, a tippet ring at the other, steelhead tippet ring, the big one. And then from here, you could, something else you could do. You could use one of those micro swivels that they sell for conventional fishing. So if you can't find a tippet ring, try and find a really tiny little swivel, and that'll work just as well. Because really a tiny swivel, when you're adding one of these flies with the tungsten bead, trust me, that little tiny swivel's not doing anything. So there you go. And there's your fluorocarbon. Always remember, the bit that sinks has got to be fluorocarbon, not mono. Mono doesn't want to sink very well, and it's going to impede the sink of the fly. The fly is not going to get down as fast. So if you want your fly down fast and fishing well, it's got to be fluorocarbon and thin fluorocarbon. So I'm using 4x here. Don't use like 0x or 1x here. It's too much drag from the water. Use the thin stuff off that tippet knot. Off that tippet ring, I should say, or off the little tiny swivel if you want to go that route. So there's your leader. Quick to make. You can make them right on the side of the river if you wanted to. And, using something like this, you can store them. And this section with the tippet ring, that bit, you just keep reusing it until you screw it up somehow. So there's how to build your nymphing leaders. And I've built leaders like this for years, and they work just fine. And I find them very, very effective. Catch tons of fish with them. So there you go. How to build a simple nymphing rig. Cheers.